I am sitting at the head of a polished mahogany conference table that probably costs more than the entire house I grew up in. The view from my penthouse office in downtown Austin overlooks a sprawling, vibrant skyline that I helped build. But right now, my eyes are locked on a single piece of thick, cream-colored paper resting on the cold glass surface in front of me. It is a formal lawsuit. My parents, the exact same people who erased me from their lives 21 years ago, are demanding 30% of my $85 million company. Their lawyer claims it is for family support and emotional distress. But as I stare at their signatures on the dotted line, all I can hear is my mother's voice screaming in my face when I was just a little boy, telling me I was a parasite who ruined her life. Why did they come back now after decades of absolute silence? And what do you do when the toxic family that threw you away like garbage suddenly wants a massive piece of the empire you built from the very ashes they left behind? Have you ever heard the people who were supposed to protect you call you a mistake? Let me know in the comments below, because nobody should ever have to carry that kind of heavy, suffocating pain all by themselves. To truly understand why this lawsuit is the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal, you have to go back to a freezing winter night in 1996. I was only 9 years old. I remember the cold more vividly than anything else. It was the kind of bitter, biting wind that made your lungs ache every single time you tried to take a deep breath. But the cold inside my house, radiating from my own parents, was much worse. I was sitting on the faded, stained carpet in the narrow hallway, clutching a small plastic toy car in my trembling hands, trying my best to make myself as small and quiet as possible. My parents, Gideon and Corinne, were fighting in the kitchen again. They always fought, and the fights always, without fail, circled back to one single root cause: me. My father had just lost another job. He was a man who constantly blamed the entire universe for his own sheer incompetence, and my mother was his devoted, blind enabler who agreed with every twisted word he said. Suddenly, a heavy ceramic coffee mug shattered against the wall just inches from where I was hiding in the shadows. I flinched hard, curling into a tight, terrified ball, pressing my back against the peeling wallpaper. My mother stormed out of the kitchen, her face twisted in a kind of raw, unfiltered rage that I will never, ever forget. She marched right up to me, pointed a trembling, accusing finger right at my face, and unleashed the words that would haunt my nightmares for years. "You are a parasite, Callahan. Ever since you were born, this family has had nothing but bad luck and misery. You drain every ounce of life from us. You are a curse. We should have never had you." I did not even know what the word parasite meant back then. I was just a little boy, but I knew the pure, venomous hatred in her eyes. I knew what it felt like to be looked at not as a beloved son, but as a disgusting disease they desperately needed to cure. My father walked up behind her, glaring down at me with cold, empty indifference. He did not defend me. He did not tell her to calm down. Instead, he simply told me to go get my coat. He did not say where we were going. He did not say a single comforting word. He just reached out, grabbed my thin winter jacket from the metal hook by the door, shoved it forcefully into my chest, and dragged me out the front door into the freezing night. The car ride was utterly suffocating. The heater in his old car was broken, and the windows were fogged up with our silent, tense breaths. I sat in the passenger seat, my small hands gripping the edge of my jacket, keeping my eyes locked on the dark road ahead. I kept hoping he would turn around, that he would sigh and say it was all just a bad dream, that we were just going to get ice cream to cool off, or that we were just going for a drive to clear his head. But neither of them spoke a single word. The tires crunched loudly over the thick snow and treacherous ice until we finally pulled into a quiet, unfamiliar suburban neighborhood on the other side of town. The car stopped abruptly. We were parked in front of a modest, well-kept house with a warm yellow porch light glowing bravely in the dark winter night. It was the home of Aloan, an older woman who lived a few blocks down the street from my grandparents. She used to give me warm sugar cookies when I walked home from school, always greeting me with a gentle smile. My father leaned over, popped the heavy passenger door open, and looked at me with eyes as dead as stones. "Get out." I stared at him, my 9-year-old brain short-circuiting in pure panic. "Get out? Here? In the freezing snow? In the middle of the dark?" I said, "Get out, Callahan. We are done with you." He shoved me roughly toward the open door. I stumbled out onto the icy pavement, the brutal wind instantly cutting right through my thin jacket like 1,000 tiny knives. Before I could even turn around to ask what I was supposed to do, or when he was coming back, the car door slammed shut with a sickening thud. The engine roared loudly, the tires spun desperately on the ice, and the red taillights faded down the street, swallowed whole by the dark night and the relentless falling snow. I stood there for what felt like hours, shivering so violently my teeth felt loose in my gums. I did not cry. The sheer shock of the moment had frozen my tears before they could even form. I just stood alone on the freezing sidewalk, staring blankly at the tire tracks left behind in the snow, waiting foolishly for them to turn around. They never did. Eventually, the wooden front door of the house creaked open. Aloan stepped out onto the porch, wrapped tightly in a thick flannel robe. She peered into the darkness, spotted me shivering uncontrollably by the curb, and hurried down the snowy steps as fast as she could. She did not ask a million pointless questions. She did not panic or scream. She just took one heartbreaking look at my freezing, trembling body, wrapped a heavy warm wool blanket securely around my small shoulders, and guided me inside her home. Her house smelled incredibly comforting, like cinnamon and old, cherished books. She sat me down by the warm radiator in the living room, made me a huge cup of hot chocolate that my shaking hands could barely hold, and sat right beside me in total, supportive silence. I really thought being abandoned in the freezing snow by my own flesh and blood was the worst thing they could ever possibly do to me. But I was so wrong. The real Parasite was still out there, hiding in the dark, waiting patiently to strike me again when I least expected it. Growing up in a world without the very people who brought you into it leaves a very specific, agonizing kind of hole in your chest. Aloan took me in without a second thought and formally became my legal guardian. She was an absolute saint, a quiet but fiercely protective woman who patiently taught me how to read complex books, how to tie my shoes properly, and how to stand up straight when the world tried to push me down. But even with all her endless love and daily encouragement, I was still the sad kid with the empty chair at every single school play. I was the lonely kid who forged his mother's signature on field trip permission slips in the school bathroom just so the teachers would not give me that awful, sickening look of deep pity. For the first few agonizing years, the naive child inside me still genuinely believed they would come back for me. Every single Christmas, every single birthday, I would walk to the corner store and buy a cheap greeting card with the few dollars I managed to earn doing hard yard work for our neighbors. I would sit at the kitchen table and write in my best cursive, pressing the pen down hard, desperately hoping that if my handwriting was neat enough, they would realize I was a good boy now and come bring me home. I would carefully mail those hopeful letters to our old address, and every single time, without fail, they would come back a few weeks later. Stamped in harsh, unforgiving red ink across the front were the words "Return to sender." By the time I was a miserable teenager, I kept those returned envelopes stashed in an old, battered shoebox safely hidden under my bed. It was my own personal, tragic museum of pain. I did not keep them there to torture myself. I kept them as a harsh, daily reminder of exactly what happens when you foolishly expect love from empty, heartless people. I eventually stopped sending those letters, but the deafening silence from their end remained a heavy, suffocating presence in my everyday life. I aggressively threw myself into my academic studies. It was the only aspect of my chaotic life that I could actually control. I got straight A grades in every single subject. I joined the competitive debate team and won regional tournaments. I worked grueling part-time jobs late into the evening just to help Aloan pay the rising utility bills. I was deeply determined to go to a good college, to prove once and for all that I was not a curse, that I could be something meaningful in this world. When I finally turned 18 years old, a thick, beautiful envelope arrived in the mail. It was an official acceptance letter to a highly prestigious university, along with a partial academic scholarship. It was an amazing achievement, but it was not nearly enough money to cover everything. However, I knew I had a secret weapon waiting for me. My dear grandfather, right before he passed away, had lovingly set up a small trust fund savings account in my name when I was just a tiny baby. It was legally supposed to unlock on my 18th birthday. The balance was roughly $8,500. That might not sound like a massive fortune to most people, but to a broke kid living with an elderly guardian on a fixed income, it was an absolute lifeline. It was my tuition, my expensive textbooks, my entire future. The very day after my 18th birthday, I proudly walked into the local bank downtown, clutching my identification card and the old, yellowing documents my grandfather had given a loan for safekeeping all those years ago. I sat down across from the bank teller, a polite middle-aged woman with kind, weary eyes. I handed her the paperwork, explained who I was, and confidently asked to withdraw the entire fund for my upcoming college enrollment. She smiled, typed on her keyboard for a moment, furrowed her brow in confusion, and typed some more. The silence in the small bank stretched on uncomfortably. The kind look in her eyes slowly shifted into something that made my stomach drop into my shoes. Pity. I am so incredibly sorry, sweetheart, she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. This account was completely emptied out 4 years ago. The room instantly started spinning. The air felt too thick to breathe. I begged her to check again. I told her that was impossible. It was my name on the account. No one else had access. She turned the heavy computer monitor slightly so I could see the glowing screen for myself. The balance was $0.00. The withdrawal had been fully authorized and executed by my legal parents, Gideon and Corinne, who were sadly still technically listed as custodians on the account from when I was an infant. I stumbled out of the bank, struggling desperately to pull air into my lungs. I had not spoken to my mother in 9 long, painful years. I did not even have her current phone number saved anywhere. I had to frantically look up my father's full name in the public phone directory just to find their new landline number. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely push the metal buttons at the dirty payphone down the street. The phone rang 3 agonizing times before someone finally picked up. Hello? Her voice was exactly the same. A little older, perhaps, but it still carried that sharp, incredibly impatient edge that always made me feel so small. Mom, it is Callahan. Dead silence fell on the other end of the line. For a terrifying second, I thought she had simply hung up on me. What do you want? She finally snapped, sounding deeply annoyed, as if a random telemarketer had just interrupted her favorite television show. I asked her about the money. I asked her how she could possibly take the only thing my grandfather left for me, the money I desperately needed to go to college and build a life for myself. Her response was so bone-chillingly cold, so entirely devoid of any normal human emotion, that it still echoes loudly in my head today whenever I close my eyes. That money was ours, Callahan. Consider it back pay for the 9 miserable years of expenses we wasted raising a parasite like you. We needed that money for your brother. Stop bothering us and figure out your own pathetic life. Do not ever call this number again. She hung up with a sharp click. I stood there holding the heavy plastic receiver, listening to the monotonous dial tone buzzing in my ear. I later found out, through a mutual distant relative who still talked to Aloan, that the exact week they drained my precious college fund, they bought my younger brother Declan a brand new, shiny sports car for his sweet 16th birthday. The spoiled golden child got a luxury sports car fully paid for by the stolen future of the son they cruelly threw away in the snow. I did not shed a single tear that day. All the profound sadness, all the desperate yearning for their validation and approval evaporated right there in that grimy phone booth. It was instantly replaced by a cold, hardened, unbreakable resolve. That was the exact day the vulnerable boy who wanted his mother died. And that was the day the strong foundation for my massive corporate empire was finally poured. I firmly decided to skip my high school graduation ceremony. I knew exactly what that crowded auditorium would look like. Hundreds of proud, smiling parents holding expensive cameras, cheering loudly when their kids proudly crossed the brightly lit stage. I simply could not sit in those hard plastic chairs and stare blankly at the empty seats in the back row where my family was supposed to be celebrating my achievements. Instead, while my happy classmates were throwing their graduation caps high into the air and going out to fancy, expensive celebration dinners, I was wearing heavy, grease-stained coveralls, working a grueling triple shift at a local, run-down mechanic shop on the bad side of town. I desperately needed money. If I could not go to the prestigious university of my choice because my parents stole my fund, I would just have to build my own education from scratch. I worked at the noisy shop during the day, my hands always smelling intensely like dark motor oil and cheap, bitter coffee. At night, I sat alone in the damp, leaky basement of a Lowen's modest house, staring relentlessly at a second-hand laptop with a terribly cracked screen that I bought from a pawn shop. I taught myself how to write complex code. I voraciously devoured every single free online programming course, every heavy library book on modern business management, high-level finance, and advanced software development. I slept maybe 3 or 4 hours a night. I was running entirely on pure, unadulterated spite and the desperate, burning need to prove to the world that I was not a worthless mistake. By the time I turned 22 years old, I had successfully built a revolutionary software program specifically designed to help struggling trade schools streamline their outdated curriculum and instantly connect talented students directly with eager employers. I proudly called my new company Apex Horizon. It started out as a humble one-man operation in that freezing basement. I was the lead developer, the entire marketing team, the polite customer service representative, and the janitor who swept the floors. The early days of the business were absolutely brutal. I was harshly rejected by dozens of wealthy investors. They looked at a skinny kid wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit with no fancy college degree and practically laughed me right out of their towering glass offices. But I adamantly kept pushing forward. I continuously refined the software until it was flawless. I strategically found a massive niche market that everyone else in the tech industry was foolishly ignoring. And slowly, agonizingly, the financial needle finally started to move in my favor. My very first corporate client paid me a staggering $10,000 for a year-long software license. I took sweet Eloan out for the nicest, most expensive steak dinner we had ever had in our entire lives. By year 3, we officially hit $1 million in annual revenue. I finally moved out of the damp basement and rented a tiny, respectable office space located above a busy strip mall. I hired 2 brilliant developers who were just as young, hungry, and determined as I was to change the industry. But I did not want to just build another soulless software company. I wanted to build a massive safety net for the vulnerable kids who were constantly falling through the cracks of society. Kids exactly like me. I started intelligently funneling our massive software profits directly into the real estate market. We bought rundown, neglected apartment complexes, fully renovated them from the ground up, and created a groundbreaking subsidized housing program specifically for teenagers aging out of the broken foster care system or orphaned kids who literally had nowhere else to go. We gave them a safe roof over their heads, essential job training, and a real chance at a successful life. The business exploded beyond my wildest dreams. Apex Horizon quickly became a terrifying dual-threat empire dominating both cutting-edge educational technology and a massive real estate portfolio heavily focused on community social impact. The financial numbers climbed at a truly dizzying rate. $10 million, $20 million, $50 million. I remember the exact moment my life truly changed forever, solidifying my place at the top. I was 28 years old, sitting comfortably in a sleek, panoramic glass boardroom high above the streets of Chicago. I had just finished negotiating and signing a massive, multi-year contract with a national educational board worth an unbelievable $15 million. The expensive ink on the contract was barely dry, and the older executives were happily popping expensive bottles of champagne to celebrate. But I quietly stepped out into the long hallway, pulled out my smartphone, and rapidly dialed the only phone number that actually mattered to me. Eloan answered cheerfully on the second ring. "We finally did it, Eloan," I whispered softly into the phone, leaning my tired head against the cold marble wall, my throat feeling incredibly tight with emotion. "We really did it. It is all real. I know you did. My sweet boy," she said, her gentle voice warm and incredibly steady. "I never doubted you for a single second of your life." I immediately bought her a beautiful, sprawling custom house with a massive, vibrant garden. I hired a full-time dedicated staff to take care of her every need, and made absolutely sure she never had to worry about a single utility bill, medical expense, or grocery receipt for the rest of her long life. She was my real, true family. The toxic people who happen to share your blood mean nothing if they treat you like dirt on the bottom of their shoes. Real family is simply about who consistently shows up when you have nothing to offer them. For 21 peaceful years, I existed in a state of wonderful, quiet isolation from the cruel people who abandoned me in the snow. I had successfully erased Gideon, Corinne, and Declan from my mind. They were merely faded ghosts of a terrible past life. I was totally untouchable, incredibly secure in the towering fortress of success I had painstakingly built with my own 2 hands. I had erased them from my mind for 21 long years, until a random Tuesday afternoon in November, when the ugly ghosts of my past decided to violently kick the door down, courtesy of a highly publicized magazine article that was never supposed to be about them in the first place. It all started with a simple interview request. A prominent, hard-hitting journalist named Ronan from Forbes magazine had been closely tracking the rapid, unprecedented rise of Apex Horizon and the unique, highly successful social housing model we had implemented across the state. He strongly wanted to do a massive feature piece on the company. I usually avoided the eager press at all costs. I deeply liked my quiet privacy. But my aggressive public relations team finally convinced me that it would be incredibly good for the company's charitable mission to get widespread national exposure. We did a long, extensive sit-down interview in my office. Ronan was incredibly sharp, constantly digging deep into my personal background. I kept my answers very vague, simply saying I was raised by a wonderful guardian and had to figure things out on my own from a young age. I did not name my horrible parents. I did not mention the specific town they lived in. I just focused entirely on the business metrics and the housing program. The massive article dropped online early on a Monday morning. The bold headline read, "Callahan, from abandoned on the streets to an $85 million CEO. It went wildly viral almost immediately across social media platforms. People loved the dramatic rags to riches story. My work inbox was completely flooded with glowing congratulations from wealthy partners, loyal clients, and inspired strangers. 3 short days later, my personal phone loudly buzzed with a text message from a local area code number I did not immediately recognize. "Hey Callahan, so incredibly proud of you. We always knew you were destined for total greatness. Miss you so much. We should catch up over dinner soon. Aunt Talia." I stared blankly at the glowing screen, a sudden cold shiver running rapidly down my spine. Aunt Talia, the cowardly woman who silently watched my parents throw me away into the snow and never once bothered to call Child Protective Services. The fake woman who sent me a $5 birthday check exactly once when I was 10 years old and then conveniently forgot I even existed. She was a classic flying monkey, sent directly by my parents to test the waters and see if I was receptive. I blocked the toxic number instantly, but the fragile dam holding back the past had already cracked open. The following afternoon, I was walking confidently through the expansive, ultra-modern lobby of the Apex Horizon headquarters in downtown Austin. I was deeply engrossed in discussing a complex new software rollout with my brilliant lead engineer. The massive lobby was beautifully filled with bright natural light, featuring a stunning 2-story waterfall wall, and highly trained security personnel stationed at every entrance desk. As I approached the main front security gates, my breath suddenly caught painfully in my throat. Standing right there, aggressively arguing with my head security guard, were 3 people I had not laid eyes on in over 2 decades. Gideon, Corinne, and Declan. My parents looked much older, their bitter faces heavily lined with visible stress and deep resentment, wearing outdated clothes that were clean but clearly well worn out. But Declan, the infamous golden child, stood arrogantly between them like a spoiled prince. He was 28 years old now, wearing an incredibly cheap, poorly fitting suit, casually holding a fake leather briefcase that looked completely empty. He had an incredibly smug, arrogant smirk plastered proudly across his face. The stressed security guard saw me approaching and looked incredibly relieved. "Mr. Callahan, these angry individuals loudly claim they are your immediate family. They do not have an appointment on the schedule." I stopped a few feet away from them, my posture rigid. The bustling noise in the massive lobby seemed to abruptly die down. Corinne's eyes widened dramatically. She put a trembling hand to her chest, putting on a sickeningly dramatic, theatrical performance of a loving, devastated mother seeing her long-lost son. Callahan, oh my God! Just look at you. You are so handsome, so successful. She took an eager step forward, both arms outstretched as if preparing for a warm hug. I did not move a single muscle. I just stared at her with a look so freezing cold and devoid of any affection that it stopped her dead in her tracks. Her outstretched arms dropped slowly to her sides. Gideon cleared his throat loudly, puffing out his chest, trying to look authoritative. Son, it has been a very long time. We saw the big article in the magazine. We are very proud of your success. We thought it was finally time to put the silly past behind us and reunite our loving family. Before I could even mentally process the sheer, mind-boggling audacity of his lying words, Declan stepped forward boldly, casually slipping his hands into his cheap suit pockets. He looked around the luxurious, multi-million-dollar lobby, whistling softly under his breath. Very nice place you got here, bro, Declan said, his loud voice dripping with unearned, arrogant entitlement. Mom and Dad said you have been doing pretty well for yourself. Look, let us skip all the emotional garbage. I know you desperately need someone you can actually trust to help run this massive place. I am willing to step in today as your new vice president. We can easily keep all the big profits right here in the family. You owe me a huge cut anyway, considering Mom and Dad had to focus all their limited resources on fixing the terrible mess you left behind when you ran away. I felt a sudden, terrifyingly peaceful calm wash completely over my entire body. It was not burning anger. It was perfect, crystal clear clarity. This useless golden child, who had everything handed to him on a silver platter, who drove a luxury sports car bought directly with my stolen college fund, was standing in the immaculate lobby of my empire, aggressively demanding a plush corner office and a massive paycheck just for sharing my DNA. I looked silently at Declan. Then I looked at Corinne, who was actually nodding encouragingly at her precious, greedy youngest son. I took one slow, deliberate step closer to the tense security guard and spoke in a voice loud and clear enough for everyone in the entire lobby to hear perfectly. I have never seen these strange people before in my entire life. They are illegally trespassing. Escort them off the private property immediately. If they resist even slightly, call the police and press charges. Corinne gasped loudly, clutching her pearls. Gideon's face instantly turned a violent shade of purple. Callahan, you cannot do this to us. We are your parents. He shouted furiously as two burly, well-trained security guards quickly stepped forward and firmly grabbed him by the arms. You owe us everything, Declan shrieked wildly, his smug, arrogant facade completely shattering into a pathetic, childish tantrum as a huge guard shoved him forcefully toward the heavy revolving doors. We are your real family. You are absolutely nothing without us. I turned my back on them instantly and walked calmly toward the private elevators, listening peacefully to their desperate screams fade away as they were violently thrown out onto the busy city street. They foolishly thought I was still the terrified 9-year-old boy crying helplessly in the snow. They had no idea I had been meticulously preparing for this exact war my entire life. The game was just getting started. If you honestly think getting forcefully thrown out of my corporate building by armed security would easily stop them, you grossly underestimate the sheer, bottomless delusion of toxic narcissists. They simply do not feel normal human shame. They only feel viciously victimized when they do not instantly get exactly what they want. Exactly 3 days after the embarrassing lobby incident, a thick, certified legal letter arrived directly at my executive desk. It was from a sleazy, low-rent law firm based out of their small hometown in Ohio. The demanding letter was a true masterpiece of legal extortion. It formally stated that Gideon and Corinne were filing a massive lawsuit against me, aggressively demanding 30% of the total equity in Apex Horizon. Their twisted reasoning, they boldly claimed they had lovingly provided the foundational support and crucial life lessons that single-handedly drove my massive financial success. They argued in print that because I was such a difficult, parasitic child, they suffered immense emotional and severe financial distress, and therefore my current massive wealth should be equally shared to support my poor brother, Declan, who had supposedly suffered greatly from my selfish absence. It was totally laughable. Any decent, sane judge would quickly throw it right out of court in 5 seconds flat. But a legal victory in court was not their actual plan. Their malicious plan was to intentionally cause a massive public relations nightmare. They heavily threatened to go straight to the hungry tabloids, to paint me as a ruthless, greedy billionaire who cruelly abandoned his poor, loving family to rot in poverty while he lived in extreme luxury. They desperately wanted to hold my hard-earned reputation hostage until I quietly wrote them a massive, multi-million-dollar settlement check just to make them go away. My elite team of corporate lawyers were absolutely furious. They wanted to aggressively bury the opposing counsel in endless paperwork and vicious countersuits immediately. But I simply held up a hand, stopping them. "No," I said softly, staring out the window. "We are not going to fight them on paper just yet. I want to know exactly what kind of desperate situation we are dealing with." I quickly hired one of the most ruthless, incredibly expensive private investigators in the entire country. I paid him a massive premium bonus to dig deep into every single financial record, tax return, and failed business dealing Gideon, Corinne, and Declan had touched in the last 20 years. I deeply wanted to know why they were suddenly so incredibly desperate for cash. I wanted to know exactly where my $8,500 went. It took the skilled investigator less than 48 hours to drop a thick, incredibly damning file right onto my mahogany desk. I eagerly opened the folder and read thoroughly through the detailed reports. The sad picture it painted was truly pathetic, but incredibly satisfying to read. Declan, the beloved golden child, was a catastrophic, monumental failure. My parents had foolishly remortgaged their family house to heavily fund his very first tech startup. It went totally bankrupt in just 6 months because he recklessly spent all the venture capital on luxury tropical vacations and heavily leased sports cars. 2 years later, they foolishly drained their entire retirement accounts to proudly fund his second business, a boutique marketing firm, that also quickly went under after he was aggressively sued for completely failing to deliver promised services to angry clients. Gideon and Corinne were currently drowning in massive, unpayable debt. Their credit scores were completely destroyed. To desperately keep up false appearances, they had quietly moved their own small consulting business into a cheap commercial warehouse space they leased on the dirty edge of town, lying to their friends that they were expanding. But the harsh truth was, they were over 3 months behind on their warehouse rent. The angry bank was circling them like sharks. They were facing total, undeniable financial ruin and imminent eviction from their only remaining property. And then, I looked closely at the exact address of the commercial warehouse they were currently renting. I stared intently at the piece of paper. I blinked hard, making absolutely sure my eyes were not playing cruel tricks on me. I read the address of their rented office building out loud. I started to laugh. It was a dark, hollow sound that echoed loudly in my empty, sprawling office. The cosmic irony was so perfectly poetic, so deeply satisfying, that I could not have scripted it better if I tried for 100 years. What would you do in this exact situation? Would you just write a big check to make the toxic family go away forever? Or would you ruthlessly burn their delusional entitlement to the ground? Keep watching, because what I systematically did next shocked even my own seasoned legal team. I picked up the phone and immediately called my brilliant head of real estate acquisitions. "Listen to me very carefully," I said firmly into the phone. "I am sending you a specific address for a commercial warehouse property located in Ohio. It is currently owned by a regional bank managing distressed assets. I want you to aggressively buy the debt on that specific building today. I do not care what the financial premium is. Overbid if you have to. I want Apex Horizon to legally hold the deed to that property by this Friday. Expedite all the paperwork. Pay in full cash." My trusted director didn't ask any pointless questions. He just executed the direct order flawlessly. By the end of the busy week, I was firmly holding the legal deed to the building in my hands. I was officially the sole owner of the exact property where my parents and my golden child brother ran their miserably failing business. I was their new landlord. I quickly called my lead corporate attorney back into my office. "Tell their lawyer we officially agree to a private mediation session next Wednesday," I instructed him with a cold smile. Tell them I am open to discussing a generous financial settlement. Tell them to bring Gideon, Corinne, and Declan in person to the meeting. My lawyer looked deeply confused. Callahan, you do not have to give these extortionists a single dime of your money. We can crush them in court easily. I smiled wider, casually sliding the heavy property deed into a sleek, bright red folder. I am not bringing a check to this mediation, I told him, tapping the red folder confidently. I am bringing the reckoning. Let them think they have won the lottery. Let them walk into that room feeling victorious and arrogant. I packed my leather briefcase, the red folder safely tucked inside. For 21 long years, they loudly called me a useless parasite. They constantly said I was a drain on their resources. But the harsh truth was finally coming to light, and I was going to systematically make sure they choked on it. I told my lawyer to agree to the mediation. But I wasn't bringing money. I was bringing the deed. The neutral law office was located on the 42nd floor of a towering glass building in the financial district. It was designed to look intimidating, with dark oak paneled walls, expensive abstract art hanging in the corridors, and a massive conference table that seemed to stretch for miles. I arrived exactly 10 minutes early. I wore a tailored navy blue suit that cost more than my parents used to make in a month. I sat at the far end of the long table, my posture rigid, my expression totally unreadable. Beside me sat my lead corporate attorney, a brilliant man named Marcus who had a reputation for destroying opponents with a single glance. In front of me, resting quietly on the polished wood surface, was the bright red folder. Right on time, the heavy wooden doors swung open. Gideon, Corinne, and Declan walked into the room, flanked by their sleazy, cheap-looking lawyer who wore a suit that was clearly bought off a discount rack. My parents had fully dressed for the part they intended completely to play today. Corinne wore a modest, faded beige dress and a subtle pearl necklace, looking every inch the heartbroken, struggling mother. Gideon wore a simple gray suit, his shoulders slumped in a fake display of elderly exhaustion. But Declan could not hide his true nature. The golden child strutted into the expensive room like he already owned the entire building. He wore a flashy silver watch that I knew was fake, and he threw himself into the leather chair opposite me, kicking one foot up to rest ankle over knee. He looked at me with a sickeningly smug smirk, his eyes darting hungrily toward the briefcases on our side of the table. He thought this was payday. The opposing lawyer opened the session with a long, rambling, incredibly fake speech about the sacred bonds of family. He talked endlessly about how hard Gideon and Corinne had worked to provide a stable foundation for me, and how tragic it was that success had caused such a terrible rift between us. I sat in pure silence, letting their small talk and fabricated sorrow stretch itself painfully thin across the room. Then the tone dramatically shifted. Corinne leaned forward, clasping her hands tightly together on the table. She managed to squeeze out a few fake tears, letting them roll dramatically down her wrinkled cheeks. "Callahan," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "You know we always did our best. You were a very difficult child. You were a parasite on our limited resources, taking and taking while we struggled just to survive. But we gave you the gift of life. We gave you the drive to succeed. And now poor Declan is suffering. He has had such terrible luck in the business world. It is only fair that you share the immense wealth you built using the thick skin we gave you. You need to cut your brother in. He deserves a huge piece of your company." I looked at her, feeling an overwhelming sense of calm wash over my mind. "Before we discuss any financial figures," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady, "I have a tiny recording device sitting right here on the table. Under state law, this is a one-party consent state, but I am formally notifying everyone in this room that this entire session is being recorded for legal accuracy. Do you consent?" Their cheap lawyer waved his hand dismissively. "We have nothing to hide. Let the record show we consent. We just want a fair 30% equity split to mend this broken family." I nodded slowly, pressing the small button on the recorder. "You just called me a parasite," I said, looking directly into Corinne's eyes. "You used that exact word when you threw me out of your house into the freezing snow when I was 9 years old. Do you remember doing that? Gideon scoffed loudly, leaning back in his chair. Oh, grow up, Callahan. We used tough love. You were out of control, draining our finances. We left you with a neighbor. You survived just fine. And the money? I asked quietly. The $8,500 my grandfather left for me? The money you withdrew the exact same week you bought Declan a brand new sports car? Declan laughed out loud. A harsh, grating sound. Man, you are still crying over a few grand from decades ago? You are worth $85 million now. Yeah, they took the money. They needed it. They spent it on me because I was actually going to make something of myself while you were busy playing victim in a basement. The statute of limitations on that petty theft ran out a million years ago, bro. You cannot touch us for that. Just sign the equity papers and stop whining. I let the silence hang in the room like thick, suffocating smoke. Marcus, my lawyer, sat totally still, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. He did not need to speak. The tape was rolling. Every single arrogant sentence, every cruel shift in tone, every carelessly rewarded lie was now permanently documented on the audio file. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the old theft did not matter because time had passed. They gleefully admitted to all the abuse and the financial theft right into a microphone, purely out of sheer, unadulterated arrogance. That was the exact moment the tiny, invisible cracks formed. Not in me, but in the delusional narrative they had built for themselves. Are we done discussing ancient history? The opposing lawyer asked impatiently, tapping his pen on his legal pad. My clients have made a very reasonable demand for 30% equity in Apex Horizon to resolve this emotional distress out of court. What is your counter-offer, Mr. Callahan? I reached out with a steady hand and placed my fingers on the bright red folder. My counter-offer, I said softly, is inside this folder. They all leaned forward, their eyes wide with unrestrained greed. Corinne quickly wiped her fake tears away, a hungry gleam replacing the manufactured sorrow in her eyes. Declan actually licked his lips. They honestly thought I was about to hand them a multi-million-dollar settlement. They thought they had finally won. But they were about to learn what a real parasite looks like. I slowly flipped open the heavy cover of the bright red folder. I did not pull out a company checkbook. I did not pull out equity transfer agreements. I pulled out a thick stack of official, notarized real estate documents, stamped heavily with the official seal of the state county clerk. I slid the documents across the polished mahogany table, pushing them directly toward their smug, cheap lawyer. He picked up the papers, his brow furrowing as his eyes scanned the complex legal jargon at the very top of the page. He flipped to the second page, then the third. Slowly, the arrogant color began to entirely drain from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. What is this? Gideon demanded, his voice suddenly sharp with creeping anxiety. Where is the financial settlement agreement? Your lawyer is currently reading it, I replied, leaning back in my expensive leather chair and steepling my fingers. The opposing lawyer swallowed hard, dropping the papers back onto the table as if they were literally on fire. These are property deeds, he stammered, looking at Gideon and Corinne with sheer panic. He bought the debt. What debt? Declan snapped, snatching the papers off the table. He stared at the bold print, but it was clear his failed business mind could barely comprehend the legal terminology. Allow me to clarify the situation for you, I said, my voice echoing coldly in the silent room. A few weeks ago, my private investigative team looked into your financial portfolio. I discovered that your small consulting business and your entire livelihood is currently operating out of a rundown commercial warehouse on the east side of town. I also discovered that you are drowning in debt because of Declan's multiple failed startup ventures. Corinne's face turned extremely pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The regional bank that held the mortgage on your warehouse was preparing to foreclose on you. I continued, enjoying the delicious, terrifying realization blooming in their eyes. You are exactly 3 months behind on your commercial rent. You owe the bank a significant amount of money. So, last Friday, my real estate acquisitions department stepped in. Apex Horizon purchased the distressed debt from the bank in cash. I paused, letting the immense weight of the moment settle over them like a crushing boulder. I now legally own the building you are sitting in. I own the warehouse you operate out of. I am your landlord. Gideon's jaw dropped wide open. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. You bought our building? He whispered, his voice trembling with genuine terror. I nodded slowly. You came into this room demanding 30% of my company. You called me a parasite. You loudly claimed that I was a drain on your resources. But let us look at the actual facts, shall we? You stole $8,500 from a helpless teenager to buy a sports car. You ruined your own retirement funds to support a lazy, entitled son who bankrupted 2 separate companies. And now, you are secretly squatting in a commercial property without paying rent for 3 straight months. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my father. Tell me, Gideon, who is the real parasite in this family? You are currently surviving on my property. You are eating off my dirt. The silence in the room was entirely deafening. It was the sound of an arrogant empire made of fragile glass shattering into a million pieces. They had walked into the room fully expecting to extort a billionaire. Instead, they had just realized that the billionaire held the absolute power to render them totally homeless with a single signature. Corinne started to hyperventilate, clutching her chest. This is a cruel joke, she gasped out. You cannot do this to us. We are your blood. Blood means nothing when it is poisoned, I replied coldly. If you are enjoying this story so far, please take a quick second to comment the letter W down below. That stands for win, and it lets me know who my true, loyal listeners are who have stayed with me to witness this justice. I will be reading and liking every single comment that has a W in it. Now, let me tell you how I finished them off for good. Declan suddenly snapped. The fragile illusion of his unearned superiority totally collapsed under the crushing weight of reality. He realized he was not getting a corner office. He realized he was not getting a massive equity payout. He realized he was utterly broke, and the brother he had mocked his entire life held all the cards. You think you are so smart, Declan screamed, his face turning a dark, mottled red. He lunged across the wide mahogany table, sweeping his arms out and knocking the expensive water pitchers and glasses to the floor with a massive crash. I am going to destroy you. I will take everything you have. He tried to scramble over the table to reach me, but Marcus, my lawyer, did not even flinch. Before Declan could get halfway across the wood, the heavy doors to the conference room swung violently open. 2 of my massive, highly trained personal security guards stepped into the room. They moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Declan by the shoulders and effortlessly hauling him backward. They slammed him down into his leather chair, holding him there while he thrashed and cursed like a wild animal caught in a brutal trap. Sit down and shut your mouth, or I will have you arrested for attempted assault right now, I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic screams like a razor blade. Declan froze, panting heavily, terrified of the giant men holding him down. But the guards were not the only people who walked through those doors. Following closely behind them was a tall, sharply dressed man holding a digital voice recorder and a small notepad. It was Ronan, the famous investigative journalist from Forbes magazine. Gideon and Corinne stared at the stranger, total confusion masking their deep panic. Mom, Dad, Declan, I said, gesturing casually toward the journalist. I would love to introduce you to Ronan. He is the brilliant writer who penned the original article about my success. When I told him that my estranged family suddenly emerged from the woodwork to legally extort me for 30% of my company, he was extremely interested. He thought it would make a fantastic follow-up piece for the magazine. The dark side of sudden wealth. Ronan smiled politely, though his eyes were sharp and predatory. Thank you for the incredible quotes today, folks, Ronan said smoothly, admitting to grand larceny regarding a minor's trust fund on a recorded line, followed by an attempted physical assault in a law office. This is going to be a front-page feature for sure. Corinne buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, wretched sob. This time, the agonizing tears were undeniably real. Her precious, pristine public image in their small hometown was about to be burned to the ground for the entire nation to read about. Gideon looked like he was about to have a massive heart attack. He turned to me, his eyes wide, pleading desperately. "Callahan, please, do not let him publish this. It will destroy our consulting business. We will lose all our remaining clients. We will have absolutely nothing left." "You already have nothing left, Gideon," I corrected him coldly. I reached back into the bright red folder and pulled out one final piece of paper. I slid it gently across the table until it rested right in front of him. "This is a formal 30-day eviction notice," I stated evenly. "You have exactly 1 month to vacate my commercial warehouse property. Furthermore, you owe Apex Horizon 3 months of back rent. And finally, my legal team has calculated the $8,500 you stole from me 21 years ago, applying standard market interest rates for the duration of the theft." I tapped the bottom of the paper with my index finger. "The total comes out to $45,000. If you do not pay the back rent and the stolen funds in full by the end of the 30 days, I will authorize my attorneys to seize your remaining personal assets, including your cars and your residential home." Declan stared at the massive number on the paper, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. "You get no equity," I said, closing the empty red folder. "You get no corner office. You get nothing but exactly what you earned." They sat there in the ruins of their own greed, too stunned to even speak. I stood up, buttoned my expensive suit jacket, and walked calmly toward the door. "We will see you in court," their cheap lawyer suddenly squeaked out, trying desperately to salvage his own failing pride. "We are filing a lawsuit for emotional damages. We will let a judge decide." I paused at the door, looking back over my shoulder with a final, icy glare. "Please do," I whispered. "I cannot wait to play the audio tape for the judge." They actually tried to fight it, driven by sheer, blinding desperation and the toxic belief that they were the ultimate victims of the universe. Gideon and Corinne pushed their cheap lawyer to officially file the lawsuit in the state family court. They demanded compensation for emotional trauma, claiming I had maliciously lured them into a trap to publicly humiliate them. They genuinely believed a sympathetic judge would look at my massive wealth and force me to hand over a multi-million-dollar settlement just to make the embarrassing media circus go away entirely. They were so incredibly wrong. The courtroom was quiet, small, and smelled faintly of floor polish and old wood. There were no flashing cameras allowed inside, no grandstanding audience. It was just us, my elite legal team, their sweating discount lawyer, and Judge Silas, a stern, incredibly sharp older man who looked like he had zero patience for foolishness. Judge Silas sat high up on his bench, slowly reading through the massive stack of documents my lawyer Marcus had submitted into evidence. He read the Forbes article. He read the financial records showing the stolen trust fund. He looked over the commercial eviction notices. And most importantly, he listened to the crystal-clear audio recording from the mediation session. The recording played loudly on the court speakers. Corinne's voice echoed in the silent room, calling me a parasite. Declan's arrogant voice proudly admitted that they stole my college money to buy him a sports car because the statute of limitations had run out. As the tape played, I watched my parents sitting at the plaintiff's table. They looked physically smaller than I had ever seen them. Gideon kept his eyes firmly glued to the floor, his face flushed with deep, undeniable shame. Corinne was clutching a crumpled tissue, her hands trembling violently. Declan sat rigidly, staring blankly ahead, finally realizing that his golden child status could not save him from the crushing weight of the actual law. The tape clicked off. The heavy silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Judge Silas took off his reading glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose with a deep, exhausted sigh. He looked directly down at the opposing lawyer. "Counselor," Judge Silas began, his voice dripping with intense, icy disdain. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a lawsuit as deeply frivolous, malicious, and entirely devoid of any legal merit as the one you have brought before me today." The cheap lawyer swallowed hard, shrinking down into his chair. "Your clients abandoned a 9-year-old child in the snow," Judge Silas continued, his gaze shifting to burn holes directly into Gideon and Corinne. "They admitted on a legal recording to stealing his inheritance. And now they have the sheer, breathtaking audacity to use this court system to attempt illegal extortion against the very child they abused, simply because he managed to become wildly successful without them. Judge Silas slammed his wooden gavel down with a loud, cracking bang. "This absurd case is dismissed with extreme prejudice," he announced loudly. "Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay all of the defendants' expensive legal fees in full. And Mr. Callahan, given the recorded threat of physical violence from your brother Declan, I am instantly granting your request for a permanent, strict restraining order against all 3 of these individuals. If they come within 500 feet of you, your home, or your business, they will be arrested and jailed immediately." My mother gasped loudly, a horrific, gut-wrenching sound that echoed off the high walls. "We are adjourned," Judge Silas said, standing up and leaving the bench without looking at them again. It was over. The brutal war that began 21 years ago in a freezing snowstorm had finally ended in a quiet, sterile courtroom. Marcus packed up our briefcases, giving me a rare, satisfied nod. We walked confidently out of the heavy courtroom doors and out into the bright, warm afternoon sun shining down on the courthouse steps. Before we could reach my waiting black SUV, I heard footsteps rushing frantically behind us. "Callahan, wait, please." I stopped and turned around slowly. It was Corinne. She ran down the concrete steps, her cheap heels clicking loudly. She collapsed to her knees right there on the dirty sidewalk, grabbing desperately at the fabric of my expensive suit pants. "Please, my baby," she sobbed, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "We are so sorry. We lost the warehouse. The bank took our house. We have nowhere to go. You cannot leave us like this. We are your family. I am your mother." I looked down at the pathetic, broken woman weeping uncontrollably at my feet. A short distance away, Gideon and Declan stood frozen on the courthouse steps, watching the scene in sheer, humiliating defeat. The golden child was crying silently, wiping his nose on his sleeve. I gently but firmly reached down and peeled her desperate fingers off my suit fabric. "I do not have a mother," I said quietly, my voice entirely empty of any anger or any sadness. "I just have a landlord who threw me out 21 years ago." I stepped back, turned around, and climbed into the back seat of my waiting vehicle. The heavy car door closed with a solid, satisfying thud. As the driver pulled smoothly away from the curb, I looked out the tinted window one last time. I watched them shrinking in the rearview mirror until they were nothing but tiny, insignificant specks, entirely swallowed by the shadows of the city. I never looked back again. The massive city skyline gradually faded into lush, rolling green hills as my driver took me back to the quiet, sprawling suburban estate I shared with Aloan. The intense adrenaline that had fueled my veins for the past month slowly drained away, leaving behind a profound, quiet sense of total clarity. When I walked through the heavy oak front doors of our home, I found Aloan out in the massive backyard. She was wearing her oversized sun hat and thick gardening gloves, carefully pruning a row of vibrant, blooming rose bushes. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over the entire garden, making the world look incredibly peaceful. I took off my expensive suit jacket, rolled up my dress shirt sleeves, and walked out into the warm grass to stand quietly beside her. She did not ask me how the brutal court hearing went. She did not need to. She just took one long, comforting look at my relaxed face, smiled gently, and handed me a small pair of gardening shears. "Help me trim the dead branches away, my boy," she said softly. "The healthy flowers need room to breathe and grow properly." I smiled, taking the shears and getting to work. As the sun began to slowly set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of purple and orange, I realized something incredibly important. I did not feel a triumphant, explosive sense of victory. I did not feel the burning thrill of savage revenge. I just felt clean. I had spent my entire adult life building a massive financial empire, secretly driven by the dark, heavy pain of being the invisible, unwanted child. I thought success would act as a shield to protect me from their crushing rejection. But the real freedom did not come from the $85 million in my corporate bank accounts. It did not come from taking their pathetic warehouse or exposing them in a national magazine. True freedom came from realizing that I never actually needed their love in the first place. The following Monday morning, I walked into the busy headquarters of Apex Horizon and called a massive company-wide meeting. I stood up on the main stage in front of hundreds of my dedicated employees and formally announced that the subsidized housing branch of our corporation was getting a permanent name change. We were officially rebranding it as the Alohan Foundation. It was a permanent tribute to the incredible woman who opened her front door on a freezing night and proved to a terrified 9-year-old boy that family is not defined by matching DNA. Family is simply defined by the people who choose to treat you with unwavering respect, the people who protect you when you are vulnerable, and the people who celebrate your brightest victories without asking for a cut of the profits. To anyone out there listening to this story right now, if you have ever been treated like a burden by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, if you have ever been called a mistake or a curse or a parasite, please hear my words very carefully. You do not owe toxic people access to your beautiful life just because you happen to share the same genetics. Your strict boundaries are sacred. Your immense success is entirely your own. You have the absolute right to walk away from anyone who tries to dim your light. I left them with nothing, and I forced them out of their own building. Some internet critics might call my actions ruthless or extremely cold-hearted. But I am asking you, the listeners who have stayed with me through this entire journey. Was I wrong for taking back the justice that was stolen from a freezing 9-year-old boy? Should I have shown them the mercy they violently denied me for 21 years? What would you have done if you were standing in my expensive shoes? Please share your thoughts and your own personal stories in the comments below. This channel is a safe community for people who have survived toxic families, and your voice truly matters here. If the story gave you a sense of validation, or if it empowered you to finally set that difficult boundary in your own life, please hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of true resilience and justice. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, your future belongs to nobody but you.